Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly regarding candidate interviews for Assembly Seat H. It is Friday, January 6, 2023. We are scheduled from 9:30 a.m. until noon. However, it would be good if we could stop a little bit before noon, so that since we have a special meeting scheduled to start at noon as well. Madam Clerk, would you go ahead and call the roll? I know we often do not call the roll for work sessions, but since we're in the chambers, if you would go ahead and do that, that would be great. Thank you.
Miss Allard. Mr. Solt.
Here.
Mr. Perez-Verdiep.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Cross.
Mr. Cross will be joining shortly.
Miss LaFrance.
Here.
Mr. Constant.
Here.
Miss Salatel.
Here.
Miss Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Mr. Volant.
Here.
Mr. Peterson.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Welcome, everyone, and especially welcome to the candidates. Very happy to have you here today and appreciate your interest in the position. And I want to note for the record, we have been joined by Mr. Cross. On December 20, 2022, Assemblymember Dunbar announced his resignation effective January 3rd. Also on December 20th, the Assembly passed AR 2022-410, declaring the Seat H vacant as of January 3rd and initiating the process to fill the vacancy of Seat H, which is in District 5 and represents East Anchorage by appointment. Applications were accepted by the Municipal Clerk's Office from December 28, 2022 until January 4, 2023, and we are here today to interview the qualified candidates who timely submitted their applications for Seat H in District 5 to represent East Anchorage. All applicants who met the qualifications for Seat H are considered nominees for appointment per AMC 2.70.020B.2. The Assembly is not required to interview all applicants or to ask applicants the same questions. The Assembly is not required to take public testimony at any interview, and an applicant may withdraw their application at any time prior to appointment. This is per AMC 2.70.020B.3. We will proceed with the interviews in the order of the alphabet drawing. The first candidate will be given 3 to 5 minutes to speak to the Assembly about why they are interested in this position and what makes them a suitable candidate for it. We will then proceed going through the queue of Assembly members with questions, and we will start, we'll rotate the start, and so for example, we'll begin with introductions by Mr. Crawford, and then when we start with questions, I will take the first Assembly member question, and Mr. Wojciechowski will respond first, and then we will go to Ms. Morgan, Mr. Foner, Mr. Sweet, and then back to Mr. Crawford. And then the next question, and then I'll go just by members in the queue, we'll start with Ms. Morgan and then proceed. Hopefully, too, we will have some time after we go through questions at the end for any follow-up questions. We will set the timer for, I believe, 2 minutes per question, and if you have a short answer in that time, and if members want to do a follow-up in that 2-minute period, that's fine. And we can also have a little bit of flexibility to adapt as we go. And with that, I believe we are ready to proceed. We'll start with Mr. Crawford, and you will have 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, to let us know why you applied for appointment.
Well, good morning to everybody. I know quite a few of you, and some of you I know, did it not work? Pardon me?
It's working. Hopefully
That sounds okay now.
Yeah. Okay. I
We'll
thought I
restart
saw
your
people
time here.
looking askance, so I wasn't sure if I was coming across or not. But my name's Harry Crawford. Some of you know me. I know most everybody here. Anyway, I've been in a part of public service for the last 25 years on the east side of Anchorage, and I've had a number of positions over time to allow me to get to know the district, and I also served in the state of five terms in the legislature, and it gave me an idea how to perceive problems and solutions all across the state, as well as here in my home district. So I really believe that I can bring something to the table here and allow, I'm a pretty good listener, and I can listen and perceive where the problems are and help find consensus to get to solutions. We've got one of the most serious problems, obviously, is our homeless situation. And I know that we have to solve the immediate problem of how to get people in out of the cold. But what I'd like to be able to help with is looking at the reasons behind homelessness, whether it's mental illness or just somebody's job went away and now their family's homeless. There are a number of reasons, and I want to get to those long-term solutions to solve our homelessness problem. When I was in the legislature, I spent 3 terms on the finance committee. I have a little experience working with budgets and taxes and trying to find that middle ground that doesn't hurt people and doesn't advantage other people too much. I mean, it's a zero-sum game, and if we advantage some group more than others, that makes it imbalances the situation. So I believe that I'm here to help, and that's the reason why I'm running. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Mr. Wojciechowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sounds like you can hear me. So why am I sitting here? It's probably a valid question. I care about Anchorage. I retired as a physician assistant in 2015 after my wife of 48 years, my beautiful wife that's sitting up there, was diagnosed with cancer. And she got out the other side of that tunnel. But that makes you really reevaluate values and time and the importance of it. So I stepped away from the physician assistant profession. I was active politically when I was president of the Alaska Academy of Physician Assistants. I put it's on the website, and I'm I was told it would be copied to all of you, so you had an opportunity to read a quick synopsis of some of the things I was able to accomplish during that period politically, and I'm proud of that. But when I retired and stepped away from my professional career and also the political offshoot from that, enjoying life became the focus. I mean, we dedicate a lot of our time to our fitness, to our nutrition. But about 3 years ago, some things were going on in the municipality that got me politically active again. I realized I needed to get involved. I know I have history with most of you. You've seen me in this sweater stand at that podium. I was not always kind in everything I said, but I still stand behind the importance of the message I was trying to bring. And we don't need to go back over that. You all have memories of that just the same as I do. That being said, you didn't know anything about the other background that I put in the synopsis that you've had a chance to read. I recently was elected president of the Basher Community Council. It wasn't a position I really sought or wanted to go after. I was approached by a group of residents that weren't happy with the direction that our community council had taken as of late. There were no elections since 2015. They're supposed to be held annually. And I just wanted to see greater involvement in the community. After I got elected and the rest of the board got elected, we have stayed active. There's quite a few things that we've accomplished. And I say we because I'm not taking credit for what we've accomplished. It's been done as a team. And that team effort is important. I think, end goals should be collaborative. And you don't always have to totally agree to achieve those goals. I think a diversity in voice is very important. And that's what I would offer to this assembly. I thank you again for this opportunity, and frankly, I thank you for the time that you put in. I probably have never expressed that as well as I should have when I stood at that podium, but everything that I said from that position came from my heart, and I say that now. The time you put in is appreciated. May not always agree with what you decide, but I do appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wojciechowski. Ms. Morgan.
Thank you for taking the time to interview me today. I know what a personal sacrifice it is to serve in political office, and I appreciate and applaud your selflessness. My name is Hillary Morgan, and I would like to serve as the interim assemblywoman in Forrest Dunbar's vacant seat. To answer the most pressing question you probably have, why, I need to tell you a little bit about me. I moved from Hawaii to Anchorage in 1991 after spending 6 years living and working outside the country. I lived in Australia for a year, in the Philippines, where I spent 2 years working in a refugee camp, Thailand, France, most of Europe. I moved to Hawaii, and after my first wife passed away from cancer, moved to Alaska at the age of 33 for 2 years on my way to Africa. Here, the uniqueness of my story ends. As it has for hundreds before me, the Alaska lure grabbed me, and my 2-year stint turned into 27. When my current wife, Robin, and I left in 2006 to move back east to care for my aging mother, I thought we were saying goodbye to Alaska forever, but after she passed, Alaska pulled us back, and we realized Alaska was home. I've lived in the east side of Anchorage for the entire time I've lived in Alaska. In preparation for today, I looked over my resume and realized that I've spent most of my career on my way to this interview. In the 2000s, I was appointed to sit on Mayor Begich's Health and Safety Transition Team and the Housing and Neighborhood Development Commission, where the discussions and tensions around affordable housing were only slightly different than today's divisions on amending Title 21 to accommodate ADUs. I chaired Mayor Begich's Task Force on Homelessness in 2004, which produced Anchorage's first 10-year plan on homelessness, and was on Mayor Ethan Berkowitz's transition team and human trafficking task force. In Washington, D.C., I was appointed to Mayor Fenty's Human Services Policy team. More recently, I served as treasurer for the Basher Community Council from 2015 to 21, and on the executive board of Downtown Rotary from 2015 to 2018. I'm currently a member of the Basher Community Patrol. As you can see from this sampling of my volunteer work, I enjoy working to solve community issues from a policy and systems level. These experiences have given me a breadth of knowledge to address issues facing the Assembly now. My professional experiences closely align with the current needs of the Assembly. 2 of the 4 hot topics on your Assembly webpage are homelessness and housing. In play are the Holton Hills development proposal and the discussion of accessory dwelling units. Both go to the heart of a long debate in Anchorage on density housing that requires creative solutions, unique partnerships, and diverse collaborations. By purchasing Rural Cap's first 8-plex, I launched the organization's currently thriving housing division. But the creative housing solutions I witnessed during my tenure as the Development and Communications Director for the largest affordable housing developer in D.C. opened my eyes to possibilities not yet considered in Anchorage. Chronic homelessness has plagued this city since 1976. Between the years of 78 and 91, 6 reports were produced focused on the chronic public inebriate. In 1986, 1 homeless person, Francis Trader, died on the street, creating public outrage. In 2022, 24 homeless people have died on the streets. Anchorage residents are exhausted and frustrated with this long-standing issue and deserve effective long-term solutions. I've worked in the fields of housing and homelessness for 22 years, aside from my professional experience in Anchorage at the Brother Francis Shelter and Home and Bound, mentioned in my letter to you. I helped design and implement a Housing First program in New York City, targeting the long-term chronic homeless individuals that resulted in an 85% housing stability success rate. I have concluded that the only solution to homelessness is permanent housing or permanent supportive housing. My career in the nonprofit sector required me to work with a cross-section of community members with varying political affiliations, socioeconomic backgrounds, and cultural heritages. As a nonprofit CEO, I understand budgets, fiscal management, and how to navigate to solution, all skills critical to being a successful Assembly person, even for a short time. And finally, my life circumstances are perfect for me providing intense attention and diligence to this task. I moved from full-time nonprofit management in 2018 to part-time consulting. I have total control over my schedule. If selected for this position, I will prioritize the next 3 months to fully focus on Assembly issues, meetings, work sessions, and anything else that the position requires that I do not yet know. In addition, I have no interest of holding the seat beyond the April election. No offense to those of you here who have gallantly given your full commitment to this position. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Mr. Foner?
Good morning. My name's Rich Foner. I'm 71, retired for about 7 years now. I originally came to the decision to apply for this position because I have absolutely no idea what the Assembly does and how they do it, and thought the easiest way to find out would be to sit for a few months. Like Hillary, I have no intentions of going beyond April. You may notice I'm the only person in here wearing a mask. I have idiopathic interstitial lung fibrosis, which is a terminal condition caused by, well, that's idiopathic, means they don't know what caused it. But I've got a few years left, and I'd like to spend a couple of them doing something for the public. I understand there are a lot of different things that are going on in Anchorage that a lot of different people don't really care for. And we need to make some kind of an arrangement where everybody can be seen and heard and taken care of. The homeless problem, of course, is one of the biggest problems we have here, but I think we also have a problem with snow removal, because there doesn't seem to have been very much, if any. Excuse me. Let's see. To give you a little personal background, I was born in a log cabin that I helped my father to build. I was a bottle baby until I was 4, and then the bottle broke, and I got out. And when I was 7, I ran away with the circus, and when I was 9, they caught me and made me give it back. I would really like to serve on this position if for no other reason than to inject a little bit of levity into your meetings. And like I said, to learn a little bit about what it is the Assembly does and how they do it. And that's pretty much all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Foner. Mr. Sweet?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Joey Sweet. I live at Florina Street, just off of Tudor Road in the lower southwestmost portion of the district, where I've lived now for about 6 going on 7 years. What brought me here primarily to the district, that is, was UAA, where I was fortunately able to attain not only a great education in the form of a bachelor's in political science, but my master's degree in public administration. My interest in this position stems largely from my interest in public administration. Currently, I work, as you saw, as an office admin at the Southside Anchorage Cemetery. Obviously, it operates as a nonprofit. I enjoy my work. I enjoy getting to help people. But it's not exactly something that I'm particularly passionate about, not in the same way that I am about public administration. It feels good to make a difference in people's lives, but it's not necessarily what I am passionate about. During my time at UAA, Governor Walker appointed me to the University Board of Regents, where I served from 2017 to 2019. So should I get this position, I already have experience not just in making big, impactful decisions, but doing so on a short time frame. When I was appointed in the spring of 2017, it was a very, very quick turnaround from being just another student to now being one of the people who decides the direction that the entire university takes. I was appointed on a Monday, and as referenced in the correspondence I sent, I was voting on very unpopular, very controversial issues that Wednesday. The very first vote that I took as a regent was whether or not to close the School of Economics at UAF. Given the short time frame that I had for that decision, I chose to abstain for lack of familiarity with the subject. Should I get this position, I will dedicate myself to it entirely. I have already worked with my supervisor on a plan for a leave of absence. I will dedicate myself to this essentially as a full-time job. I've tried not to get ahead of myself, but I also want to be prepared. I've reached out and spoken to an individual who I hope would consider service as my assembly aide. I've also reached out and talked to a group of anti-poverty and homelessness activists, a group I'm a part of called Results. I've reached out and talked to a lawyer who is trained on issues of homelessness and said, you know, what these circumstances look like, and I've told him, if I get this position, I want us to sort of sit down and I want to pick your brain about issues of homelessness. What are solutions that other cities and other municipalities around the country and around the world have used, and how do we adapt whatever those policies have looked like historically and adapt them for Anchorage, considering the uniqueness of our climate and things like that. Likewise, I would also like to make use of my degree insofar as my capstone project was focused on the application of facial recognition. I know it's a little bit of a niche issue, it's sort of specific, but the more I researched it, I spent about a year and a half of my degree researching it, the more interested in it I became. And should I get this position, I would also like to focus my efforts on a prohibition against the use of facial recognition by the municipality. So it's not just something that I'm sort of chasing after. I have real goals, real objectives that I would like to accomplish, even if it is only for about 100 or so days. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Sweet. So we will go ahead and adjust the timer for 2 minutes, and members may go ahead and put themselves in the queue with any questions. Okay, and we will start first with Mr. Wojciechowski. Ms. Quinn-Davidson, go ahead with your question.
Thank you. I was just wondering, for those of you who didn't address it, which I think is everyone but Hillary and Joey, are you currently working, and if so, how much are you working, and how would you pair this work with what you're currently doing?
Am I to answer that? Okay. I misunderstood. I am not working. I retired, I think it's going on 9 years now. other than dedicating the time to my position as president of the president of the Basher Community Council. Most of my time commitment is self-driven towards, as I said, my fitness, nutrition. So I have time available, if that's the gestalt of the question. The answer would be yes, I can dedicate time to the position.
Thank you. And now I remember you actually did say that before, so I apologize. But I think Harry and, is it Rich? I can't see the name tags. They're too, okay.
I'm currently retired, well, actually going to be retired for the rest of my life. So I have lots of time to dedicate to learning what we do and how to do it.
I came to Alaska to work on the Alaska pipeline, and I am no longer an iron worker. I'm too old for that. I am retired, but I have some rental properties that I work on in my spare time, which I have a lot of right now. And for the next 4 months, if I were appointed, I will spend all of my time on this job.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. We'll go next to Mr. Rivera and Ms. Morgan, or Mr. Wojciechowski, if you'd pass the mic to Ms. Morgan and you can answer first. Go ahead, Mr. Rivera.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll just ask one of my questions and then I'll put myself back in the queue. So I think for those of you who have followed the Assembly, you will know that the Assembly business is a train that never stops. It's always moving. And there's always a big issue coming up. And two of them that I had on my list have already been highlighted: accessory dwelling units and the Halton Hills. There's a third one that I suspect will come up during whoever's selected your tenure, which is the Navigation Center. I will wait to ask a specific question about that, but for now, I want to understand, given the nature of the business that we have, that it is constantly moving. We have a whole host of different issues that are all of them intricate, detailed, and complicated. I just want to understand a little bit about your decision-making process and your ability to work with others. Thank you.
So, as I mentioned, I have spent most of my career in the nonprofit sector in either leadership positions or executive management as a CEO. So, I'm very well versed in the juggling of 25 million things at the same time and short decision making time periods. I basically, the process that I use is to keep my eye on the ball, on all of the balls that are juggling, and then just dive into each thing as it comes up and address it and try to find solutions across all lines of difference. Because I think in the nonprofit sector, when you're going for a mission and you're trying to achieve an end result, like in homelessness, there's no one answer and there's no way to do anything by yourself, so you have to work with everyone. So I believe strongly in collaboration and in the making collaboration work so that you get to solution. And if there's a stumbling blocks, you just keep moving forward until you get to solution. Does that answer your question?
My turn for the same question?
Yes.
Can you repeat it? Because I kind of got lost following Hillary here.
Sure. So the question is sort of twofold. I won't repeat all the other things that I said. I want to understand your decision-making process and your ability to work with others. Thanks.
My last position before I retired, I was a management assistant with the U.S. Army. Actually, what it was executive assistant to the Deputy Chief of Staff of Fort Richardson. I had to work with all kinds of different people, and I had no real problem working with them. It's a matter of listening to what people say and trying to fold that into how you deal with them. As far as my decision-making process is concerned, it's a little different. I tend to use my back brain a little bit more than most people do. It's much easier for me to make a decision if I have just a little bit of time to sleep on it or ruminate about it without actually thinking about it. And that's how I make most of my decisions. You gather as much information as possible and then let it percolate. And that seems to have worked for me for most of my life. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
So I think a good example comes from my time as a regent kind of towards the tail end in terms of how I work with others, how I sort of conduct myself as it relates to decision making. I served from 2017 to 2019, which means I served during the height of the Me Too movement. And the university began to receive more complaints than it had historically about allegations of sexual misconduct, even from years and years ago. So as a result, we sought guidance from the education department, the federal education department. What sort of guidelines does the federal government have about how universities should respond to these kinds of allegations? How can they, if they're from years ago? It's a university, it's not a punitive institution. What's sort of the direction? And we never heard anything back. So the president of the university decided we're not going to wait, we're going to charge forward and create our own policy. And so the policy ultimately that was created was to prioritize reports of incidents that happened within the past 3 years, but still direct investigative resources towards those that have happened even from decades and decades ago. That was the proposal that came to us, and ultimately I agreed and I voted for it with the 3 years as opposed to 4, 5, or 10, because my decision-making in that case was this was the policy created by lawyers. The lawyers know far more than I do about these kinds of issues. Just because I'm the regent and I'm the decision maker doesn't make me smarter than the people who are actually studying these things full time. I think, that's the correct way to go about it, is to kind of put ego aside a little bit and say, you're the expert on this. If this is what you think is best, it's my job to listen to you, get out of your way, and give you the resources you need to do your job. So I think that explains a little bit about my decision-making and work with others. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Well, I have some experience with working with other people. I had 60 of my very best friends in the legislature and a governor that I had to deal with over my 5 terms, and I developed some pretty good listening skills, and it educated me in so many things that I had no idea about before. But the people that there are about 12,000 voters in my district, and I tried to see every one of them that I could. Every campaign, I'd go to 6,000 to 8,000 doors and listen to what they had to say, and tried to take that back with me to the floor of the House. And that's the way I would treat things if I were in this position for the next 4 months. It's all about getting along with people, and I have worked on that skill over time. Thank you.
Thank you.
When it says mute, it's off. Just to the first part of the question, risk versus benefit. In my medical career, you're trained to always think that way. Every decision a person makes as an individual, every decision a group ends up making has intended and a lot of times unintended consequences. So the way I approach a problem is exactly that. Initially, we have a tendency to think, well, we should do this to solve that. But a lot of times, we forget to look at what is going to happen with that decision that maybe we're not thinking about. And I think that's important and sometimes neglected. As to the second part of the question, if you read what I offered in writing about my background, it's fairly obvious, I think, that in order to get that or be part of getting that voting seat on the state medical board, I had to work very closely with Democratic Senator Donnie Olson. Now, I had an advantage. I knew Donnie because he was also a physician, and I worked with him in Dillingham. So we had a personal connection. But he was willing, because of the time that we had spent together and the face that I and two other colleagues put on my profession, he was willing as a freshman senator to step up and put forth that bill. And it went through committee and passed. We now have a voting member, and have had for a while, a voting member that's a physician assistant on the state medical board, which is very important. And it helps bring other PAs to this state. And that's, I think, probably the best example of my ability to work with others. I have 3 seconds. Real quickly, I'm from Philly, so sometimes I may not look like I get along with people.
Thank you. We'll go to the next question, and we'll hear first from Mr. Foner. The next member in the queue is Mr. Peterson. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to thank my neighbors and constituents from East Anchorage for applying for this position. And I think it's fair to say we have a pretty deep bench in East Anchorage, and I'm fairly impressed with all of the candidates today. And my question is the same for all of you. Are you planning to run for the 2-year seat, the remaining 2 years of Mr. Dunbar's seat, or are you just up for the 4-month nomination? Thank you.
I am not planning to run for the 2-year position. Like I said before, I really just wanted to get an idea what we do here, what you do here, how it's done, and I think 4 months will be about as much of assembly work as I could take. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this on to Joey and let him answer the question.
Thank you.
No, I would not. I would be here only for the interim period from today's appointment through, I believe, April 23rd. That would be all that I would be looking at. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pete, no. I try to help out wherever I can in public service, but there are very good candidates that are intending to run for this the more permanent seat, and I'm happy for them.
I may figure this thing out eventually. It's either on or off. Pete, I appreciate that question. I really do. And I'm not going to evade the answer, but at this point, I could not say definitively yes or no. Part of it is I never sat up there where you are. So it would require me to have maybe a little taste of that pie to see whether or not it's got a bitter taste or it's something that I feel is rewarding. I know there's a lot of moving parts to running a campaign. And that's the other reason I feel I can't honestly answer that yes, I would determine that if I were appointed that I would then decide to run for the remainder of the 2 years. My wife and I did discuss this because I mentioned early on, I mean, we're both retired, we love our lives, and this is a huge time commitment. I fully understand that. So again, I'm not trying to be evasive, but I really can't definitively say yes or no.
No, absolutely not. And I agree with Harry that there are some really good candidates who have put their names in the ring already for the permanent seat, and I'm happy to support them.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Okay, for this next question, we will start with Mr. Sweet. Mr. Perez-Verdia, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you, all of you, for putting your names forward. Some of you spoke a little bit about your concerns or your priorities in your opening statements, but one of the things that I've learned about this role is that you can't do it all. You really have to find out what you're going to spend your energy on and focus on that. And it's a short period of time. Most of you have confirmed that you're not going to be in this position for very long. So it's an opportunity for you to do something and do something important in that period of time. So what is that thing, or those two things, or those few things that you are going to absolutely focus your energy on and try to get done in a period of a few months? What is your priority?
Well, great question. As referenced a little bit in my opening remark, I would focus my efforts on a sort of two-pronged approach. The first is to continue the work that the Assembly is already doing on homelessness. Certainly that's going to be a priority for these next few months. It's still winter. The position will move into the spring, but obviously that as a priority is not going anywhere. In terms of something that I might bring a bit more uniquely, as referenced, I would like to try and champion a prohibition against the use of facial recognition by the municipality. It's unfortunately a much longer answer than I could ever do in 2 minutes, but there's not only just a growing movement against it at the national level, but according to publicly available reports, the municipality does or has used it in the past. There was a leaked report from a firm that operates on facial recognition. A bunch of their clients were leaked about 1.5 years ago, and there were 5 different law enforcement entities throughout the state of Alaska that were on that leaked list. The reporters who got a hold of that reached out to every single one on the list, and APD was on it, and APD, when reached out by the reporters, did not respond. So I don't personally know if that means they used it extensively, if they dabbled in it and got out of it. Do they still? Have they must have previously, but what that looks like, we don't really know. I don't really know. I've reached out to elected officials before, here and there, to kind of get their feedback on it, but because it's such a sort of specific thing, there's not a whole lot out there about it. I think that there's room politically to try and get it done. I like the idea of only having a couple of months to try and champion something like this. I've reached out to friends and activists who I think may be interested on sort of partnering together with this, and I would be ready to hit the ground running on championing something like that.
Thank you, Mr. Sweet. Mr. Crawford?
Thank you. I have a number of issues that I'd love to wade into, but probably the most important one that I had something to do with in the legislature was the red stripe law. My wife was hit by a drunk driver on Christmas Eve night of 2004, and came very close to dying. And when she was there in the emergency room, we didn't know whether she was going to live or die. And people kept asking me if had they caught the guy that did it. And I said, I don't know, and I really don't care about him at this point because he's already done his damage. And I want to work on something that would prevent that from happening rather than just punishment after the fact. So if I could, I'd like to make the red stripe law so that no businesses and no package stores could not look at driver's license, because several of them do. And I'd like to make that permanent. And that way, 85% of the people that are in our jails and prisons around Alaska were there because of an alcohol-related offense. And we need to get the alcohol out of the hands of the people that have proven that they can't handle the alcohol. So that would be my focus.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Mr. Wojciechowski?
Thank you. That's a really interesting question. I don't know that I particularly have an agenda. You know, you said, what are the two things? I think my first part of that answer would be rather vague, and it's that maybe to prove that people who on the outside look like maybe they couldn't work together or don't agree with each other can actually work together. And part of that, again, would fall back on that unintended consequences that I was talking about, being the voice that represents that. But as I was thinking, there actually is one item and an agenda, or it would be on the agenda for me. And that is representing the community I live in. We are the #1 wildfire danger community in the Anchorage Bowl. It's documented. And we're not thinking of that right now. We have tons of snow that's keeping us from getting to work and getting to places we want to get to. So wildfire danger is kind of off of everyone's radar. It's never off of mine. We are one fire, one wind direction away from Stuck-Again Heights disappearing. I've worked very hard during my short tenure as president of the Basher Community Council to address that issue. And I would probably carry that goal forward if I were sitting on the assembly. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Morgan?
Probably my two concerns, fortunately, are the things that you're working on right now, which is the housing and homelessness. And the biggest thing, having worked in homelessness, starting with the Brother Francis shelter, or actually family shelter before that, is that over the last probably 10 or 15 years, the field of homelessness has really moved in a direction towards a solution rather than Band-Aid approaches, which is creating more shelters or more temporary housing situations, and really trying to move people directly from the streets or from their homeless position into housing, into permanent housing, and if they need supports, to keep them there, to really make sure that the supports are provided. So I would be, you know, I've been watching the homeless situation in Anchorage sort of devolve, and it would really break my heart to see us move backwards in such a radical direction as it seems like we're going with that navigation center, which is, it has a nice name, but it's basically a large, low-barrier warehouse shelter. And we have lots of shelters in town that have existed for a long time that have been using navigation services. So it's not that we don't have navigation services, it's that we don't have the housing and the creative solutions for making sure that folks can use that housing and can stay in there. So those two issues, housing and homelessness, would be my primary attention seekers, grabbers. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Foner?
Thank you. I think something that's really important that doesn't seem to be a priority is how are we going to cope with the changing climate? You can see outside now, we've got a ton of snow out there, and I think it's going to continue. I don't think we're going to go back to nice, mild winters and sunny summers. The climate is changing, and as the people who are running the city, basically, we need to at least take into account how that climate change is going to affect things like snow removal, homelessness, and all the other different things that are happening in our town. So I think that would be my main focus, would be to try to learn more about and instruct and teach more about how the climate is going to change, or at least how scientists tell us the climate is going to change, and how that's going to affect us. Thank you.
Thank you. So Mr. Crawford will start first with responses on this next question, which will be from Mr. Solt.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair, and appreciate everyone putting your names in the hat. So my question is, as an assembly member for this seat, you're expected to represent your district. So what I want you to do is just tell me what you know about your district. Show me that you understand your district and that you will represent that district.
Mr. Solta, my district is basically a bedroom district. There are only a very few businesses there. It's a place where we live and work. And one of the things that I realized about my district early on is that we don't have any youth ball fields there. They're all over on the west side of town. It's hard for parents to get their kids over to soccer or t-ball and all of those things. I wanted to change the 22.5 acres next to the Totem Theater to youth ball fields. I got one built, but then I ran for Congress, and my representative that took my place didn't continue that. So those 22.5 acres are still there. I'd still like to turn that into youth ball fields and possibly some community gardens. It's basically a place where we live. So snow removal is probably the biggest issue that we have there. If you went through our district right now, people would tell you, I'd like to get my road widened out wider than one lane. It's a great place to live, and I want to continue to live there for the rest of my life. And I know a lot of people in the district from all those years of going door to door, and I like them, and I'd say most of them like me. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's a great question. District 5 is very diverse if you look at it geographically. I mean, you've got Stuckingen Heights, and obviously living there for the last 22 years, I'm very familiar with Stuckingen. But you have to drive 3 miles through a park to leave Stuckingen. Those of us that live up there almost constantly, jokingly say we live near Anchorage and not in Anchorage. But if you look at the district boundaries, you go down Tudor, you go down to Piper, up Piper, through what looks like a green belt, down to Turpin, up to the Glen, over, and then down covering both sides of Muldoon. I think there's a huge amount of businesses in there. I'm going to have to disagree with Harry on that one. There's also a very diverse socioeconomic grouping in that district. And I think that, and I'll be the first to admit, do I interact with folks that live in the trailer park along Muldoon? No, I've had no opportunity to do that, and frankly, no reason at this point to do that. Would I be able to? Oh yeah. I can communicate with anyone, on any level. So it would be a challenge, but it would be a good challenge.
Thank you.
I also love East Anchorage. I lived off of Baxter by the Baxter Bog there for about 15 or 20 years before I moved up to Stuckingen Heights. And with the new boundary, we definitely have some businesses there, but it is pretty much a place where people live and sometimes work or drive to other parts of town. We kind of like that because the traffic is not nearly as bad as living on the hillside, but you get kind of the benefits of living on the hillside because we're so close to the mountains. But I think that probably the biggest concern right now is snow removal. I mean, that part of town has a lot of sort of denser housing with cul-de-sacs and stuff, and there's just no place to move if the snow isn't removed. I feel like I can represent everyone there, mainly because my work in social services has created partnerships with lots of people who are in the area as well as people that are outside the area.
Thank you.
Great question. Northeast it's kind of funny. My experience with it, I've lived there all since I've been up here in '77. I've been on the east side with very short exceptions a long time ago. But what happens with us, my wife sells things on eBay and on different selling sites. And invariably, maybe 80% of the time, when someone calls her and wants to purchase something, you have to tell them where you live. And when you tell them, I live on the east side, either the phone gets hung up or you just never hear from them again. They say, okay, thank you, and that's it, goodbye. And I would like to change that. For some reason, the east side of town, which includes Muldoon and Mountain View, has just got this reputation for people don't want to be there, and yet there's so many people there. So I'd like to see if we could change Fairview too, even though that's not part of the district, because they've got the same kind of reputation. And that's not right. The neighborhoods are not like that. Thanks.
Thank you.
So it's kind of funny, where I live, although it's within certainly the boundaries of this particular assembly district, for the state legislature, my exact address is considered Midtown. And it didn't end up working out, but I was going to staff for someone representing Midtown in the legislature. So for the past several months, primarily what I've been looking at is more Midtown rather than East Side. In preparation for this role, I've reached out to a handful of folks who I know are more actively engaged on what is actually East Side more so than I am, and I've been kind of picking their brains. I know, for example, about the bus barn right off of Tudor Road. I actually live within walking distance from it. I spoke with someone yesterday who talked to me a bit about some of the concerns that local families have that live right next to that barn and the pollution that it causes. The idea brought forward, and it's just an idea, it's not sketched out or anything, but the idea is, with regards to possibly moving it, we could sort of circumvent that entire issue just by trying to transition away from traditional vehicles into trying to have an electric school bus fleet. That way you could sort of solve the problem of the pollution and not necessarily have to contend with an issue like where should the bus barn location be exactly, because that's the heart of the problem, is the pollution that it causes. So while I haven't been necessarily as involved as I would like to have been in the East Side, if I should receive this position, of course I will dedicate myself to it 24/7 for the next 100 days. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will start with Mr. Wojciechowski to respond to this next question, which will be from Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question is, what do you understand the role of the Assembly to be within the balance of power within the municipality? So we have an executive branch, which is the administration, and we have the legislative branch, which is the Assembly. What is your understanding of the role of the Assembly and how it works in that balance of power?
That's an excellent question. Thank you. I see the Assembly as the lawmaking side of that balance of power. I see the administration as the name states, administering the kind kind of like running the business, I guess is the way to look at it, the manager of the business. Whereas the assembly is the board of directors. It's trying to figure out where the funding's coming from, how the funding gets distributed, passing ordinances for the benefit of the community in general. And that's, a fairly broad answer to that question. I'm not sure if it's specific enough for what you're looking for, but that's how I see it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say sort of the same thing, that the, I see the assembly as the oversight group or board for the city, and the mayor and his folks are the folks that are managing the city, and the assembly gives them the authority to do that, but that the checks and balances are that it's the assembly's responsibility to make sure that what is sort of best for the people is done by the administration, and if there is a point of contention, to make sure that that they find a way to either work with the administration or make the administration work with them to come to some kind of solution around that.
Thank you.
Well, right now, between the assembly and the administration, it kind of reminds me of the WWE. There's nothing seeming to be going on except fighting back and forth. And I don't know how to change that, but I would like to try to be part of a change to where we all work together just a little bit better. That's it.
Thank you.
Great question. My background is having attained a master's in public administration, and part of what we talked about in pretty much every class I ever took on the subject was about the really fundamental elements of public administration, which means things like oversight, accountability, equity, things like that. And I see that as largely being the function of the assembly. I would like to, if I should receive this position, I'm not going to come into it with any kind of, preconceived notions. I'm going to check ego at the door. I'm going to check everything else at the door and get off to what I hope would be a good start with the mayor. I believe in good government. I'm not going to come in, I'm going to come in with a clean slate and try to work with the administration to the best of my ability. I know there are certain divisions between the administration, the executive branch, and the legislative branch right now. Do I believe that I can single-handedly solve them in the next 100 days? No, but I'll borrow the phrasing. I would like to be a part of the solution there, yes, but that doesn't mean I give up any sort of notion of oversight or accountability, certainly. Those are the building blocks of democracy, and I believe in them. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe that the mayor is there to implement the vision and the ways and the means of the assembly. The assembly are the people that are in connection with the residents of their districts. They listen and get input every day, whether you go to the Costco or to the car store or whatever, you hear from your constituents. And you're to take those comments and suggestions from your constituents back to the assembly, and then give that vision to the mayor to carry it out. So that's what I believe is the reason for the assembly. You're the people that are closest to the people to represent them.
Thank you. So for this next question, we'll start with Ms. Morgan, and I'm going to go through the queue, but go to members who haven't asked a question yet. So next will be Mr. Cross, followed by Mr. Volan. Go ahead, Mr. Cross.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys being here this morning. You know, at the assembly, most of what we do is it's a meat grinder of, you know, interrogating reality and trying to figure out what's at the heart of the matter so that we can make wise decisions. And in order to do that, in order to do that effectively, we have to remain curious and out of judgment for as long as possible until we have to vote on something. So can you tell me a situation where maybe you went into a situation with a very held hard opinion in something, but under further analysis realized perhaps you were either mistaken or something changed your mind? And a little bit about that process, because I think how we resolve problems here is an important attribute on doing the business of the city. So thank you.
Yes, I'll use a work situation. When I ran Homeward Bound, which was a program for homeless street alcoholics, a transitional housing program, and I have personally not been homeless, and I have not been an alcoholic, and so there were some rules to this program that I was running that the residents didn't like, and I decided to basically sit down with them and say, and one of the rules that I had instituted was that if they wanted to drink in the building that they could, because I felt that they had to learn how to be able to drink in their own apartments when they left my program. They all came to me and said that that was a stupid rule and that they really thought that I should change it. So I basically changed the way I did things, and I said that I will have everyone have an equal vote in how we run the program, but I get 51% when it comes to health and safety. So when they came to me and they asked me to change the rule to not allow drinking in the building, I was not for it at all, but I said, all right, I got outvoted, and we tried it, and of course they were absolutely right, and I ended up changing the policy, and then from that day forward, every policy that we wanted to put into place in the program, we had sort of this consensus building, and I got outvoted a lot of times, and 9 times out of 10, the residents were more insightful than I had been.
Thank you.
I really can't think of a time when I had a preconceived notion of anything that got changed by later facts. I have tried all my life to not have preconceived notions. My parents taught me to start with that prejudice was wrong, regardless of what kind of prejudice it is or what you're prejudiced against. And that's been a guiding principle for me, not to have a preconceived notion about anything until at least you've done some research, some serious research and study, not just a little bit of time on YouTube. I spend too much time on YouTube anyway. But some serious research on a subject, then you can have an idea of what you want to do about it. But preconceived notions are just not a part of my makeup. So I guess I'm perfect as far as that's concerned. So unless, of course, you take my relationship with my wife. She's right about just about everything, regardless of what I think.
Thank you.
So I actually have a really specific example. It comes from my time as a regent. I served in the last 6 months, which would have been the start of 2019. The very first week of the year, we found out that UAA's School of Education had lost its accreditation. So immediately my preconceived notion was, well, we've lost it, let's pursue it again and let's try and get it back. And that was what I told some of the members of student government that my position was and things like that. Unfortunately, as more facts came to light about why the school came up short in its reaccreditation and what the reaccreditation process would entail, I did have to change my mind, and I had to vote to close the School of Education, to not pursue reaccreditation. The reason I did that is because as more facts came to light, there were two that stuck out to me. The first is we had lost it not by a little. It was not a scenario where we needed an 80% score and we got 79.9. There were 5 different categories the school was graded on, and they only passed 1. The second was that it was going to cost a minimum of $500,000. And, a big reason as to why they lost it in the first place was because of years and years of budget cuts. What used to be a staff of, 30 is now a staff of 20, and they're still doing the work of 30 or 40, really. And so as more facts came to light, I did have to change my mind and let go of that preconceived, in hindsight, simplistic notion of, well, we lost it, let's just get it back. There was more to it than simply get it back. It was also going to be a 3-year process, et cetera, et cetera. And so upon receiving more information, I did have to change my mind, even if it was a very unfortunate set of circumstances.
Thank you.
During my time in the legislature, I wrote a number of bills, and I would get input from the public, and I would learn about unintended consequences of what my bills would do, and I would rewrite and sometimes even amend it all the way through the process till we came up with some sort of consensus that the bill could pass or fail. I have had a lot of amendments to my bills because you just learn more from people that are coming at that situation or issue from a different perspective, and I try to listen and take into account their perspectives and make the best decision that I can on the bills and the laws that I authored or put forward.
Thank you.
That's a really good question. In medicine, you operate under the auspices of the differential diagnosis. You come and see me for a problem, I take a medical history, and that's really where the rubber meets the road. That's frankly where you're going to probably learn the right answer. You can do all the lab tests you want to verify what you feel at the end of that history. But the fact of the matter is, sometimes you're not right. And you have to be able to pivot and move to the next item on that differential diagnosis and admit to yourself, you know what, my gut feeling wasn't right on this one. So that's maybe a vague answer for you, but I'll give you a very specific one. When I first got elected as president of Bash Community Council, I was kind of gung-ho, very much so about the fire danger. And I wanted to call a supplemental meeting of the council, and we were unable to get our normal elementary school room. And our vice president was able to get a room behind the Anchorage Baptist Temple. So I put out the community update, said, hey, we're going to have a meeting about wildfire danger. It's going to be at this location in this room. Unbelievable. The emails that I got in the beginning were intolerant, hateful. Anyone that goes to that church is homophobic. They're anti-Semitic. And what the people that were calling the folks there intolerant didn't realize was there's a lot of people that live in Stuckaken that go to that church. And, that in and of itself is an intolerant statement. I finally realized there was no way I was going to bring these factions together. And I canceled the meeting. I had to make a decision and a pivot. And it was the ultimate case of unintended consequences.
Thank you. So Mr. Foner will be the first responder to this next question, which will be from Mr. Voland. Go ahead, Mr. Voland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. the WWF or WWE caricature of the Assembly, our relationship with the administration, is sad and interesting and perhaps partially based in reality. However, I believe there is interest in bettering that relationship among members of both branches and in having more timely communication. Also, believe it or not, there are some recent areas of cooperation and collaboration between the Assembly and the administration. For instance, funding a path forward to pilot both the mobile crisis team and mobile intervention team to have 24/7 operations. That said, if we're going to have that better relationship, one of the applicants mentioned that they had provided testimony that was perhaps unkind in the past. As part of the Assembly's job, we have to listen to very passionate testimony and respond with professionalism and kindness. In my opinion, whether it's in medical practice or in public service, civility is important. And I just wonder if the applicants could comment on their take on the necessity of civility in public service. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Volin. And just to restate your question, you would like the candidates to comment on the necessity of civility in public discourse. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think civility is necessary in everything. If you're not going to be civil about stuff, you're not going to get anything done, except maybe a fight. So sometimes you have to swallow what you're thinking. At least that's the case for me. I've had to swallow things that are initially going to come pouring out of my mouth in order to think about it for a few seconds, to be civil, because it's just easier. Everything is easier if there's a modicum of civility. And I know my answers are short, but they're also civil.
Thank you.
So this gets back kind of to what I had mentioned before in an earlier response about just sort of believing in the fundamentals of public administration and good governance. I referenced before about accountability and oversight, but certainly civility is one of those key principles as well. I did not attend any of the meetings that featured the more raucous testimony. I was sort of dissuaded, I think, like a lot of Anchorage citizens, from attending during that time for that reason. And I would like to be a part of the solution in moving forward towards restoring some of that order and things like that. My time as regent was very controversial. I already mentioned about voting against the School of Education. We got obviously a lot of pushback against that. But to even speak on it outside of that context, I interned in the state legislature for then Senator Berta Gardner. There was a proposal brought forward for the university essentially to purchase Mount Edgecombe High School and operate it as another vestige of the university. Members of the joint education committees, I think, sort of assumed that the university had already reached out to Mount Edgecombe and the community and done their sort of due diligence, but that was not the case. This proposal was actually a surprise to the folks who attend Mount Edgecombe and their families. And as somebody who was on the education committee at the time, my boss, in turn, got a lot of emails and phone calls about the proposal, and they were very racially charged. They were livid at the notion. I won't repeat or get into the particulars, but I think the way that the senator handled it was full of grace and something that I would point to as an example of how I would behave myself should I get this position and should civility continue to be sort of an issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
So in my time in the legislature, and I keep going back to that because it was 10 years of my life, I realized that people that I agreed with on some things were absolutely opposed to those, to other issues, and people that I had disagreements with sometimes were my best allies in another issue. There was a senator from Fairbanks that he and I clashed on many issues throughout our time in the legislature, and then the issue of going to for-profit gambling in Alaska came up, and it amazed both of us that we were sitting in the witness chair in front of the Finance Committee, both advocating not to go to for-profit gambling and to have casinos in Alaska. And we were able to stop that by one vote. And if he hadn't been there, and if I hadn't been there, we wouldn't have been able to bring both sides together and stop that. That's one of the things that I'm most proud of. There are only 2 states in the United States that don't have for-profit gambling and casinos and all, and one of them is Alaska, and the other one is Utah. I'm originally from Louisiana. I saw the ills that for-profit gambling brought to my hometown, and I don't want it for Anchorage or Alaska.
Thank you.
I think civility has many degrees. When everyone agrees about something and everything is kumbaya, that's obviously civility. Perhaps the next step away from that is a discussion that leads to disagreement, yet you can still be civil. Perhaps the next step beyond that is debate, and debate can go however direction you want it to. There's no reason for debate to be hostile. And then there's always the ability to agree to disagree. So I think there's lots of different levels in the description or definition of civility, but I think it's important to always realize that there's nothing wrong with agreeing to disagree. Thank you.
Thank you.
When I was elected president of the Student Senate in college, that was my first lesson that being a public, having a public position was very, very different than being a private citizen. And I've seen that in all of the positions that I have been in since then, as CEO of a nonprofit or as a representative of a particular platform, particular group, like when I was running the YWCA. And I think that when you become when you're in the public and you take a public position like being on the assembly, that your job is to not only be civil, but that, when people come up and stand on the podium and yell and scream and do things that we've seen in the past couple of years here, unfortunately, that's part of the job of being a public servant. And you have to listen to that and try to figure out where they're coming from and why they're so angry, and then figure out how to respond to that. And I believe that civility should be happening a lot more just in general and across all sort of human interaction and communication. But I believe firmly that as a person in a public position, that you are bound by an even higher, level of responsibility for being civil and being civil with your constituents and also with each other.
Thank you. So for this next question, we'll start with Mr. Sweet. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a follow-up question to that. over the last 3 years, we've had quite a parade of perspectives that came through this room, and all manner of fabrications, pretty much outright lies about how our process worked and how people participated up here and made decisions. I served formerly with a very honorable person, John Weddleton, and he and I disagreed a lot. We disagreed a lot, but what we agreed on was how we were going to make decisions. So my question to you is, what do you think is the process to making decisions that people can disagree and yet at the end of the day still work together?
Well, it's a really good question. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is, as a member of the assembly, it gets back to how you as an individual conduct yourself, right? If you treat others with respect, they will show it back, hopefully, and that's with regards to your fellow members, that's with regards to members of the general public. It's a 24/7 job, right? It's not like I can post silly, offensive things on Facebook and then still come in here and expect to get things done, right? It's going to alienate people. It's going to set a bad example, things like that. So I think when it comes to the actual function of still being able to get things done and still function, quite frankly, it all comes down to yourself and how you set that standard. I think I did that as regent. I took it very seriously. I think in 2 years, I held myself to a very high standard. I never, even with my friends, we were all college undergrads. If they would joke about, oh, that's Mr. Regent, he's going to defund us if we do X, Y, Z, I would stop the conversation and I would say, no, that's not, I don't care if we're goofing off and having fun. That's not, we don't cross a line like that. And I think that's the kind of mentality that I would bring to this position.
Thank you.
Well, I think educating myself on any issue is really the key to knowing what's right and wrong. I was raised by my parents to know the difference between what's right and wrong, but then you have to know the points of any issue that you're called on to deal with. So I think once you feel very comfortable with the sides of the issue, then you can make a decision that you're comfortable with. And I know John Weddleton, and I understand how you can be civil and work together, but disagree. And that happened many times in the legislature. And I've felt comfortable with my decisions in the legislature, and I would feel comfortable, I'm sure, once I delve into the issues that we'll be faced with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question, and thank you for mentioning John Weddleton. In the, I don't know what the length of time was, well over a year, email exchanges that I've had with this entire body. Whenever I sent emails to the assembly, I sent them to everybody. And John Weddleton was by far the best communicator on this, on that list. He wasn't in my district. He didn't have to respond to me. But we had some delightful discussions on the topics that, the main topic obviously at that point in time was COVID and COVID mitigation and the use of the CARES Act money. So, to your point, I understand what you're saying, Chris, about maybe not agreeing with him. He was able to change my mind on a couple instances, and I was able to maybe guide him in a different direction because of those emails. And I also really need to give credit to Pete. Pete did not respond as much as John. No one responded as much as John. But I called you to task for something that you said at a meeting, and we don't need to go into specifics about that, but you responded immediately, and you said, you know, Jim, you're absolutely right. I shouldn't have said that. You probably remember what it was. And we all say things that we would like to take back. I'm sure when the send button happens, you know, a lot of us are going, well, I wish I could get that back. But John was a great communicator. I wish I could be anywhere near as good as he is.
Thank you.
In my personal experience, I've found, for me, what works best is to remain really curious about why the other person thinks the way they think, how they took the same facts that I'm looking at and got to such a different, in my mind, like a different, rapidly different decision. And so that has worked over time. It's not new to me. It's in the Difficult Conversations, Harvard Negotiation Project books, but it has really helped me to find that thing that you can both agree on to begin the conversation, to then figure out how to resolve whatever the particular issue is that you're talking about. And I think that coming from that position at all times allows you to be able to, as Jim said, respond regardless of what is coming at you, because instead of getting angry and seeing it just from your perspective, for me, finding out why they think that way, how they got to that, how they got to such a different conclusion than I did, has been really helpful.
Thank you.
Civility is a dying art, apparently. And it's good that bodies like the Assembly, the legislature, the Senate, they all have rules that require civility. Unfortunately, those rules never extend to the members of the public who come up to talk to us or to you. But you still have to be civil in order to maintain, not the illusion, but in order to maintain your objectivity. As soon as you start losing your civility, you start losing your objectivity. You start losing your objectivity, and you lose your ability to make the most correct decision. Lots of different degrees of correctness in any decision that a body like the Assembly would make. But civility will guide you to the most or a more correct decision than incivility, because incivility, you're just throwing rocks. And wow, this is the longest one of my answers has taken. So I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go to a second round of questions, which will be kicked off by Mr. Rivera, I'm just going to jump in with the yes-no question. And actually, Mr. Foner, you got to something that I've been thinking about, and that is our rules of procedure. Our Tuesday meetings are for getting the business of the municipality done. They're work meetings. They're not town halls, though we often do get passionate testimony from folks. But the reality is the lack of civility and sometimes the refusal of folks, whether here on the dais or members of the public, to follow rules affects our ability to do the work. And sometimes we don't get all our work done, and that's costly and inefficient. So my yes or no show of hands question is, and this is not a deal breaker question, do you have familiarity with Robert's rules? And are you, my second question, are you willing to follow the rules of the body? Yes. I'm sorry, I guess I could have specified that. Raising a hand means yes. We don't have paddles. I didn't think about having the, like, speed round. I'm sorry. Apologies. So everyone raised their hand as far as willingness to follow the rules of the body. And if, just really quick too, I know sometimes, it looks really silly what we do up here with our procedures as far as like amending amendments, and I know members of the public, it can be hard to follow, but we do that for civility and the formality, right? We use last names for each other to promote civility and help us get our work done. So with that, we will thank you all. We'll move on to the second round of questions. And at this point, if members want to direct the question to everyone, I guess we would start with this next round with Mr. Crawford, or if there's just particular follow-up questions you have for individuals, that's fine. So go ahead, Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This might be a really quick second round. I might be the only one. But, so during this first round, we asked a lot of very generic questions to try to get a better understanding of how you would be in this position on this side of the dais. But I do have a specific issue-based question that I feel needs to be asked and responded to, and that is around homelessness. And there's two reasons that I'm going to be bringing up this issue-based question. One is you are all here to fill a seat, and that seat is Mr. Dunbar's seat. And Mr. Dunbar left a very strong legacy with regard to championing East Anchorage when it comes to homelessness. Second part of the reason why I'm asking this is that homelessness will be a top, if not the top subject during your tenure. We're going to be talking about it a lot over the next several months. So be ready for that, whoever gets chosen. So my question comes in three parts. First is, what do you see as the Assembly's role in homelessness? Two, and I'll repeat this twice, how would you work with the executive on homelessness? A little caveat there for those who qualify for this, especially if you disagree with the executive. Third, what are your thoughts on the Tudor and Elmore Navigation Center specifically? So I'm going to repeat that one more time. One, what do you see as your Assembly's role in homelessness? Two, how would you work with the executive on homelessness? Special caveat for those that it applies, especially if you disagree. And three, what are your thoughts on the Tudor and Elmore Navigation Center specifically? Thanks.
Okay. So we'll start with Mr. Crawford.
And it is the big issue for right now. There's no doubt. And I think it's the Assembly's...
Mr. Crawford, could you bring the mic closer to your mouth?
Okay. Is that better? Okay. Let me get back to my train of thought here. It's the Assembly's duty to come up with solutions and to fund it and give a way to get the job done. It's the mayor's job to implement that vision of the Assembly. And the second part was...
yeah, how would you work with the executive, and then Tudor and Elmore Navigation Center?
Yeah, and so I was getting into the second part without realizing it, but it is the job of the mayor to implement that vision of the Assembly. And as far as the Navigation Center, I don't want to see us put up a temporary building that's going to cost a lot, and it's like Hillary said, a low barrier place that just gives you a cot. I would like to see more permanent housing, and we have some buildings that would lend itself to more favorable housing situation, and I'd like to see those put into into use.
Thank you.
I hope I understand the three parts to this, but I'll do my best here, and if you need to get more specific, feel free. The Assembly's role, I think that's multifaceted. I think that you have, and I hate to do this, but my mind works in medical terms. You have the acute problem, and boy, do we have an acute problem. Okay, but we also have a chronic problem. And our handling of that, I think we have to be very careful in trying to treat that problem and not grow the problem by doing it. You have to find a way to turn that faucet off. I mean, what is contributing to the homelessness issue? And that's complex. There's lots of reasons that people are homeless. And I am not an expert on this by any means. This is my outside view looking in. So I think that's the Assembly's role in that. As far as working with the administration, that would be wonderful, right? I mean, it would be great if everybody was on the same page. There was a simple answer, everybody agreed on it, but that's probably not the case and probably maybe never going to be the case. And is the third part of your question about the navigation center? Okay. I was opposed to the concept of the giant 1,000-bed structure, not from a NIMBY standpoint of living and stuck again, but from a cost standpoint. Again, that case of unintended consequences. Build it, they will come. And that's the turning off the faucet side. I mean, how do you handle that? It's a tightrope that you're walking down. You don't want to grow the homeless problem by making, I guess in delicate way, making it easier to be homeless?
Thank you.
I think it's the role of the Assembly to gather as much information as possible about the issue and then direct the administration to implement a solution or to find a solution and then implement it. I think that the thing that might be lacking now is the transparency piece of this issue, and I believe that to your second part of the question, Mr. Rivera, how do you work with an administration that maybe you totally disagree with or that you're having issues with? I think transparency is the way to do that, to find out with the Navigation Center in particular, clearly there's a problem. Perhaps the original intent of the Navigation Center was a good one, but there was no clear plan of how exactly that was going to work. Who was going to run it? How some of the conversation about, well, we're going to move people from the Navigation Center to permanent housing or to other living situations. But when asked sort of how that was going to happen, who was going to facilitate that, some of the details, there was no answer to that. And so I believe that with this particular Navigation Center, as I said in my opening remarks, that is just in the field of homelessness, that is such a move backwards. And then in 5 more years or 3 more years, we're going to be sitting here with the exact same conversation about, okay, now what do we do with these 100 people, 300 people, 400 people in the Navigation Center to get them into permanent housing?
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to go with part 3 first. The Navigation Center, I don't think a Navigation Center is a good idea, personally. I'm willing to debate, to listen to other ideas, but if you're going to take all the homeless people or all the unhoused people in Anchorage or in a particular area and put them in one place, that's not a solution. The solution is housing, affordable housing all over the city. Not just on the east side, not just on the west side, not just in Midtown, but everywhere so people can have some choices. And it seems to me that what's being done now is not really affordable housing for someone who's in a situation like the homeless people find themselves in. Those houses are expensive. That's like calling my house an affordable house, and it's not. Not for someone who's not been working or who's having different kinds of problems. So there's the part three. Part one, what the Assembly is supposed to do, in my mind, is gather the opinion of the populace. We're the folks who go to the store and wind up talking to different people, to lots of people. So we're supposed to get a snapshot of what everybody in town is thinking. And I know that's really difficult to do, but I think that's what's supposed to happen. So in working with the municipality or with the executive branch, it can be difficult, but depending upon who's in the executive branch, it can be more or less difficult. But civility still counts. Civility enhances understanding of someone else's viewpoint. And I think that's the way that particular problem has to be approached. We need to be civil, even if the other person or other entity isn't being civil. You counter incivility with more civility. Kill them with kindness. I've seen that work too many times. But being uncivil towards someone who's uncivil to you is not the answer. It just makes it worse. Hope I answered the question. It was a good one, long.
Thank you.
So to the first part on what I view the role as, it would be primarily as a liaison, because I would by no means claim to be an expert on poverty or homelessness. It's something I'm passionate about, but I wouldn't say I have some kind of specialized knowledge on it. And so for me, I'm going to really dedicate my time to outreach. I mentioned before about reaching out already to some anti-poverty activists and lawyers. And I have, if I should get this position, I'm really going to dedicate myself to just being a sponge and learning as much as I possibly can. Likewise, I also see the role as being one of public outreach and raising awareness about the actions that the body is taking, because for as much attention as this issue is getting right now, I think a lot of people are where I'm at, which is this is something that matters to me, but it's not necessarily something I'm going to be super familiar with already. I think most people just sort of want to see something happen. In terms of working with the administration, I would, as referenced a little bit ago, check ego at the door. If I get it, I'm only here for 100 days. I want to try and get something done. And that sort of leads into the third question about the Navigation Center. I'm pragmatic. I want something over nothing. I understand the controversy. I understand the NIMBYism and things like that. But at the end of the day, I think getting something done and explaining it to constituents, explaining your decision-making, as long as you can do that and justify your decision to the people you represent, I think that's the important part. I'm a pragmatist. You know, I just want to see something over nothing. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question will be from Ms. Zelatel, and we will start with... And Ms. Zelatel, if you want everyone to answer, we'll start with Mr. Wojciechowski. And I just want to call attention to the time. It's 11:25, and we are hoping to wrap up by 11:45. Go ahead, Ms. Zelatel.
Madam Chair, just one question before we
Sure,
proceed.
go ahead.
Do we want to make sure that there's an opportunity for closing comments for each?
That's a great point. We'll go ahead and at 11:40 have a 1-minute closing comment.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is intended to be a short answer, but when I came on the body, my predecessor was Dick Trini, and he gave me a tour of the dais the meeting before I was sworn in, and he says, you have two choices on this dais. You can either be a potted plant or an active member. Which do you think you would be if you were selected? Thanks.
I'd say that I would be an active member.
Very active member.
Very active member who likes potted plants.
Likewise, I would try very hard to be as active as I possibly can. When it comes to, I think, a position like this, I think, though, that at the same time, you do want to be very active, but it's not just here. I think as regent, I really prioritized reaching out to as many student groups as would listen to me. Despite being based out of Anchorage full-time, I went to Fairbanks, I went to Southeast, I conference called in and things like that to other student groups and tried to make myself available to them. So I think everybody's probably going to be in agreement that they want to be pretty active, but I don't think being active just looks like trying to talk and things like that here during the meetings. I think my definition of active is outside of just that scope, right? It's to involve myself with the community councils, talk to members of the community, things like that as well.
Thank you.
I think my record speaks for itself. For those of you that know me, you know it's hard to shut me up. And for those that don't know me, I will take a position and then I will work hard for it. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question will be from Mr. Cross. And Mr. Cross, if you want everyone to answer, we'll start then with Ms. Morgan.
Anybody who's willing, I appreciate it. We spoke a lot about homelessness and addressing that issue. All those things come with a price tag. Those things are paid for by businesses. So can you tell me a little bit about private business experience and how you see the assembly helping private business grow, because those individuals will need jobs, they need employment, we need a bustling economy in order to pay for these things. How do you see us as an assembly, or what are your opinions on things we can do to improve business environment, and as kind of relay that back to your business experience? Thank you.
So my business, I own a consulting business now, and then when I lived in New York City, I worked on Wall Street, so money is usually paramount in pretty much everything I do. Every nonprofit I ran, the economic side of it was always one of the primary issues that I dealt with, mainly because if you don't have money, you can't do anything, right? And I think that the crossover between business and the issue around affordable housing and homelessness here is critical, because it's very difficult to have a business where if you go downtown, your customers are frightened away because there are people wandering around, or Midtown. If you're trying to bring tourists into the city and they have a bad experience, they're not going to come back. So I think that dealing with the issues that make this city look good and profitable are one and the same, and they both have to be dealt with, because I firmly believe that if we don't make the city a thriving place to be, then the businesses are not going to be able to thrive.
Thank you.
I don't have personally a lot of business experience in my lifetime. My wife owned a secondhand store, and we ran it for about 7 years, for about as long as our money held out. Then we had to close it because we just couldn't afford to run it anymore. As far as what we do on the assembly to encourage businesses, I would have to do some studying. I'd have to learn up on that, because I really, as I said, I don't have a lot of experience. But I agree that we need to do things that make the city more attractive to visitors and to businesses.
Thank you.
Primarily, my background is outside of private business. I mean, I have worked in nonprofits. I currently do, and in my position now at the cemetery, I have been able to really learn a lot about operating a business, even, as a nonprofit, and I'm certainly not the general manager, but I've picked his brain about making payroll, running invoices. I recognize my lack of familiarity, and I tried to improve upon it. It's to my understanding that the Assembly will be voting on property taxes very soon. In preparation, doing my homework for this position, I went to work the next day and I sat down, somebody who's kind of a mentor to me in the office, and I said, tell me everything I should know about property taxes. And we spent the next 30, 40 minutes just talking back and forth about the history, how they're assessed, things like that. I think if there's something that I recognize that I am not familiar with, that I'm not fluent in, then I try to seek out some level of greater fluency and greater level of understanding. I recognize the decisions that we have to make are very important for businesses. We've seen the population decline. Technically, it ticked up by, I think, 200 or 300 this last year, but you're not going to keep people in the state of Alaska. You're not going to attract people to Anchorage if the business community is not there for them. Pretty much everyone I knew my freshman year at UAA has left this state, and they left it because the business community, it's not thriving. Young people look around and they don't see a future for themselves here anymore. And it's heartbreaking, and I want to try and be a part of the solution that turns that problem around.
Thank you.
No, I have to face the fact that over the next 4 months, the revenue side, the income side is not going to change. Whatever is done on the homelessness issue, it's going to have to be done with the resources that we have right now. And it's going to be a matter of setting priorities with the resources that you have presently. That's going to be a very difficult choice, because every time you take something away from other issues, or then to put it towards homelessness, then the constituents for that other issue are going to be in your face as well. So it's a difficult problem, and the long-term solution is to make Anchorage a more attractive place and a growing economy, and that has to be the driving force behind what you do, is to make this an attractive place to live, work, and play. So it's about the best I can do for this next 4 months.
Thank you.
Hate to say it again, but great question. Having owned a restaurant at the age of 24, I can tell you that the number one thing that a business would love is less regulation. We're presently going to build a shop/ADU on our property, and in the last year, that process has been unbelievably convoluted. You're in the real estate business, from what I understand, so you probably understand this. All I hear from my builder endlessly is how difficult it is to try to keep current with the changes in permitting. And that hurts a business. It's difficult. You don't want your goalpost moving all the time. So if you want to foster business, not at the cost of public safety, but make things simpler on the businessman.
Thank you. So I don't have any other members in the queue. Okay, we'll go ahead then and go to a closing statement. We actually do have time for 2 minutes, since we have 10 minutes left, but a 1-minute statement is fine too. And we will start with Mr. Foner.
Well, this will be a quick statement. My statements generally are quick. I don't like to waste time. Don't have enough. I would really like to have this position, as I said in the beginning. I'd like to learn more about what the Assembly actually does, and the easiest way to do that, or the best way to do that, would be as being a part of it. And it's a nice-looking group of people here. I would not mind being associated with you guys.
Thank you.
So I think to conclude, I think there are probably two qualities that I feel I bring that I would want to highlight, and that's dedication and seriousness. I've already reached out to experts on various issues that I recognize I'm not an expert on, even just in preparation. I take this very, very seriously. This is not some flippant ladder climbing or anything like that. I view this as a job. I would treat it as a full-time job for the entire duration of these next several months. To paraphrase what was referenced before, I do want to be active. I don't want to be a potted plant. I want to get something done, even if it's going to be a more limited amount of time than a traditional 3-year term. So in conclusion, I would say that I'm very dedicated to this. I'm going to treat it very seriously, and I thank you all for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
What you do is very, very important. What you do affects people's lives. I'd really like to be a part of it and help wherever I can and bring any expertise that I might have to the job. I would very much appreciate your vote and your support. It's public service is a wonderful thing. Some of the best moments that I've had in my life were times when I was able to do something good for my friends and constituents. Thank you.
Thank you.
I very much would like to thank the Assembly for this opportunity. I'm sitting here at a table with some remarkable individuals. This has been just an awesome experience, wherever it leads. If it leads nowhere, it's been fulfilling just to be part of this. For full disclosure, yes, I did say I'm willing to put the time in, and I am. I would have to be absent for one Assembly meeting in that time frame. We have a trip that I booked 1.5 years ago, and it's we're going to have to go on it. So I just wanted to point that out for full disclosure. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity as well. And I feel that it's interesting that the timing of this vacant seat and my particular experience, professional experience, seems well matched. I think that I could offer great value at this time and some insight and education, and I hope to learn a huge amount from the Assembly members who are sitting here and also from the process.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you who are candidates. Very much appreciate not just your time today, but your concern and care for our community and your willingness to serve in this role. So thank you very much. And thank you to the members too for your thoughtful questions and for being here. I don't have anyone else in the queue, so we will adjourn and then we will reconvene here for our special meeting at noon. Thank you again. We are adjourned.